Women are demanding love from men. The most shocking truth emerging right now is this. After decades of women declaring they don't need men, that they're strong, independent, and better off alone, millions are now quietly crumbling under the weight of their own choices, desperately craving the very love and connection they once dismissed and punished men for offering. What looked like empowerment has revealed itself as a profound fracture, a crack that exposes deep loneliness and regret, especially visible around Valentine's Day, when the absence of genuine affection hits hardest and the online pleas for attention become impossible to ignore. Stick around until the end because the data and patterns show this isn't a temporary phase. It's a permanent shift that changes everything about relationships, society, and the future for both men and women. And understanding it fully will explain why reconciliation on the old terms is becoming less likely every day. And just remember, if you want tomorrow's video today, hit the join button to get early access to all of my latest uploads. What we are witnessing in real time is a fundamental reversal in the dynamics between men and women, one that has been building for years but became starkly apparent during Valentine's Day 2026. Women who once proudly proclaimed their independence, who insisted they could thrive without male involvement, who used social movements and cultural narratives to push men away, are now confronting the reality of that separation. The withdrawal of men from traditional courtship, from approaching women in public spaces, from investing emotional energy into relationships that feel one sided, has left a void that many women are struggling to fill. This is not about isolated incidents or a few vocal individuals. It is a widespread pattern visible across social media platforms, in private conversations, and in the shifting behaviors of everyday people. Men have listened to the messages sent over the past several decades. Messages that told them their approaches were unwelcome, that their presence could be threatening, that their traditional roles were oppressive, and many have responded by stepping back entirely, choosing solitude over the risks and costs associated with pursuit. This shift did not happen overnight. It stems from a long history of cultural changes that began with the rise of modern feminism, which rightly sought equality and opportunity for women, but in its more extreme expressions, framed male behavior as inherently problematic. Movements like Hash Me Too brought necessary accountability to genuine misconduct, yet they also created an environment where ordinary, respectful interactions became fraught with potential misinterpretation. Phrases like men are trash or campaigns highlighting everyday annoyances such as manspreading entered the mainstream discourse, contributing to a sense among many men that their natural instincts to connect were under constant scrutiny. Over time, this accumulated into a broader caution. Men began to calculate the risks, the possibility of rejection, accusation, or social ostracism weighed against the potential rewards of a relationship that might demand constant emotional labor without reciprocal effort or appreciation. Meanwhile, women who embraced the narrative of complete self sufficiency found that solitude, while empowering in theory, often feels punishing in practice. Men tend to find peace in their own company. They can pursue hobbies, build financial independence, focus on personal growth, and derive satisfaction from achievements that do not require constant emotional validation from others. For many men, being alone becomes a form of reward, a chance to live simply, comfortably, and on their own terms. Women, however, are wired differently in this regard. The desire for emotional intimacy, for connection, for feeling cherished and pursued runs deeper and more persistently. When that connection is absent, the resulting loneliness can feel acute, even overwhelming. This difference explains why the current dynamic has produced such visible distress among women, while men appear increasingly content in their detachment. Consider the economic realities that amplify this divide. Over the past 5 to 10 years, a significant number of working age men have exited the traditional workforce. Estimates suggest tens of millions have stepped away, not out of laziness, but through deliberate choices to prioritize peace and self reliance. Some have turned to real estate investments, generating passive income from rentals or property appreciation. Others have built online businesses, engaged in day trading cryptocurrencies, or accessed legitimate support systems like Social Security disability, food assistance programs, or interest from savings when they qualify. These men often live far below their potential earning capacity, embracing minimalism not as deprivation, but as freedom. They enjoy quiet lives of comfort, simple meals, personal projects, travel on their own schedule, without the pressures of providing for a partner or family in the traditional sense. For them, solitude is liberating. It allows focus on self improvement and financial security without the complications of relational demands. Women face a different landscape. Biological and social factors mean that many women thrive within structures of partnership, family, and community support. Historically, survival and prosperity for women often depended on these networks. In modern times, when government assistance programs strain under economic pressures and inflation erodes purchasing power, the absence of a reliable partner can lead to genuine hardship. Women who once traded traditional male provision for promises of state support or personal career success now find those alternatives insufficient. The economy has not delivered the security once anticipated, and the social safety net shows signs of weakening. In this context, the call for men to return, not just as providers, but as loving partners, has grown louder. Yet the expectation that men will re engage enthusiastically after years of being told their role was optional or even harmful ignores the depth of the resentment and exhaustion that has built up. Valentine's Day serves as a powerful annual indicator of this fracture. It is a day designed to celebrate romantic love, yet it has become a mirror reflecting unmet expectations and emotional gaps. Women in relationships notice subtle disengagement, partners who no longer plan elaborate gestures, who respond with indifference to hints about gifts or dates, who mentally check out even while physically present. Single women, particularly those who once placed men in the friend zone, now reach out to those same men with requests for Valentine's messages, small tokens, or affirmations, gestures that mimic romantic interest without the commitment. These pleas reveal a longing for the emotional validation that romantic pursuit provides, but they come at a time when many men have learned to protect their energy by declining to participate. Public figures have attempted to frame this as a male loneliness epidemic, with commentators like Scott Galloway and Oprah Winfrey highlighting statistics about men's isolation. While male loneliness exists and deserves attention, the current wave of visible distress points more directly to women's experience. Women are expressing their solitude openly online in ways that range from subtle hints to direct appeals. They discuss the pain of empty inboxes, the sting of seeing others celebrate with partners, the quiet fear that their prime years for forming families have passed. Men, by contrast, often report finding contentment in their withdrawal. They invest in personal pursuits, maintain friendships without romantic entanglements, and allocate resources toward their own well being. The asymmetry is clear. Women continue to desire men for the intimacy and security they provide, while growing numbers of men no longer feel the same pull towards women under the current terms. This reversal challenges long held assumptions about gender roles. Women were told they could have it all: career, independence, love on their own schedule without compromise. Men were told to adapt, to suppress traditional instincts, to accept diminished status in relationships. Now, as the consequences unfold, the narrative has shifted to demands that men return, rescue, provide, and love unconditionally. Yet men who have tasted the peace of detachment are reluctant to re enter a system that feels rigged against them. They see past appeals as attempts to reclaim benefits without addressing the underlying issues.
The system is collapsing. Cash will be worthless soon. Crypto is your only escape. Angry's Crypto Academy is linked in the description. Go check it out now.
The shaming, the double standards, the expectation of effort without reciprocity, the financial toll on women compounds the emotional one. As they age, many find their options narrowing. Sexual market value, as coldly as it is discussed in some circles, declines for most people over time, particularly for women in terms of fertility and perceived desirability in the dating pool. The window for starting families closes, and the realization that building a life alone may be the permanent reality sets in. Men, exhausted from past experiences and wary of future risks, choose to focus on themselves. They view many women not as partners, but as potential sources of ongoing demand, financial, emotional, logistical, without corresponding investment. This perception hardens resolve to stay away. Society itself feels the strain. When large numbers of men opt out of traditional participation, dating, marriage, family formation, the downstream effects ripple outward. Birth rates decline, communities weaken, economic productivity shifts as men prioritize personal stability over expansive ambition. Women who once celebrated dismantling patriarchal structures now confront the vacuum left behind. The government, positioned as a substitute provider, cannot fully replace the multifaceted support once offered by committed partners and extended families. In times of economic downturn, this shortfall becomes painfully evident. Men are not returning with smiles and open arms, ready to erase the past. They have adapted to a new reality where solitude brings rewards rather than punishment. They have built lives that do not revolve around female approval or relational obligation. The women who spent years punishing men for simply existing, who participated in or tolerated cultural narratives that demonized male nature, now face the outcome of those efforts. Men listened, they walked away. And in that withdrawal, they found something valuable: peace. This is not a call for vengeance or celebration of suffering, it is an observation of cause and effect. Actions have consequences, and the cumulative effect of decades of messaging has reshaped incentives. Women who want connection must reckon with the environment they helped create. Men who have found contentment in detachment have little incentive to abandon it for uncertain returns. The path forward requires honest acknowledgement of these realities, not demands or blame shifting. Only through understanding the full picture can meaningful change occur. The patterns we see unfolding are not random or accidental. They follow directly from the incentives that have been carefully constructed and reinforced over generations. When society repeatedly communicates that a man's natural desire to approach, provide, protect, and pursue is suspect at best and dangerous at worst, the logical response from any rational actor is to reduce exposure to those risks. Men have done exactly that. They have internalized the lesson that the cost benefit equation no longer favors engagement. The potential downside, rejection amplified by public shaming, career ending accusations based on subjective interpretation, endless emotional audits, financial obligations that can last decades, even without children, far outweighs the upside of companionship that increasingly comes with conditions, criticism, and diminishing returns. This calculation becomes even clearer when men observe the broader cultural landscape. Media portrayals consistently depict men as bumbling, emotionally stunted, or inherently toxic unless they conform to a narrow script of sensitivity and deference. Dating apps, once hailed as revolutionary tools for connection, have instead become environments where the average man receives minimal attention while a small percentage of men capture the majority of interest. Studies consistently show that women rate roughly 80% of men as below average in attractiveness on these platforms, creating a feedback loop that discourages participation. Men who once might have persisted through rejection now see the numbers and choose to conserve their energy elsewhere. They turn to pursuits that offer measurable returns, skill development, physical fitness, financial accumulation, creative projects, or simply the quiet satisfaction of a life without constant negotiation. Women facing this withdrawal experience it as abandonment rather than consequence. The narrative they were sold promised that independence would bring fulfillment on their terms. Career success, personal freedom, the ability to choose partners without pressure, these were presented as unalloyed goods. Yet the reality proves more complex. High achieving women often discover that the pool of men they consider suitable shrinks dramatically as they climb the socio and economic ladder. Men who match or exceed their education, income, and ambition become scarcer. And many of those men prefer partners who do not require them to suppress their own leadership instincts or earning potential. The result is a growing cohort of women in their 30s and 40s who feel they have done everything right, according to the approved script, only to find the promised partnership missing. This mismatch fuels frustration that spills into public discourse. Posts lamenting the absence of good men proliferate, often accompanied by lists of requirements that grow longer and more specific with each passing year. The irony is palpable. The same cultural forces that discourage men from approaching now produce complaints about men not approaching. Women who once demanded space now express bewilderment at the silence. The friend zone dynamic illustrates this shift most vividly. Men who invested time, emotional support, and resources without romantic reciprocation eventually learn the lesson. When those same women later seek validation or gestures of affection, the response is frequently polite detachment or complete non engagement. The emotional ledger has been balanced in the only way available by closing the account. Economic pressures accelerate the divergence. Inflation continues to erode purchasing power. Housing costs remain prohibitive in most major cities, and wages for many professions have stagnated relative to living expenses. Men who opt for minimalism, small apartments or houses in affordable areas, used vehicles, home cooked meals, modest entertainment, discover they can maintain comfort on surprisingly little income. Passive revenue streams compound this freedom. Rental properties purchased during lower price eras now generate steady cash flow. Dividend paying stocks or index funds provide quarterly injections without active labor. Online content creation, freelance work, or niche e commerce ventures allow earnings without traditional 9 to 5 constraints. These men report higher life satisfaction precisely because they have removed the largest source of stress: the need to continuously prove worthiness in a relationship market that feels punitive. Women attempting similar independence encounter structural disadvantages that compound over time. Career interruptions for childbearing, even when brief, impact lifetime earnings and retirement savings. Single motherhood, chosen or otherwise, carries financial and emotional weight that rarely distributes evenly. Biological clocks do not negotiate with cultural timelines. Women who delay family formation in pursuit of professional milestones often face reduced fertility options and heightened awareness of time passing. The societal conversation around these realities tends to focus on external factors: lack of affordable childcare, workplace discrimination, while downplaying personal agency in partner selection and timing. Yet, individual choices accumulate into collective outcomes. When millions make similar calculations, the aggregate effect reshapes the entire landscape. The Valentine's Day phenomenon captures this tension in microcosm. It is not merely a commercial holiday, it functions as an emotional stress test. Expectations peak, comparisons become unavoidable, and the absence of effort from partners or prospects feels magnified. Women post photos of elaborate setups prepared for themselves, captions insisting they deserve celebration regardless of relationship status. Beneath the affirmations lies an undercurrent of disappointment. Men, aware of the symbolism, often choose deliberate non participation. A simple text wishing Happy Valentine's Day can be interpreted as romantic interest, opening doors they prefer to keep closed. Silence becomes the safest boundary. Public intellectuals attempting to diagnose the situation frequently misdirect attention. Claims of a male loneliness epidemic, while containing kernels of truth, overlook the voluntary nature of much male withdrawal. Men who report contentment in solitude are not necessarily hiding pain. Many have actively engineered lives that minimize social friction. They maintain male friendships, pursue interests, and find meaning outside romantic validation. The loneliness that receives headlines often attaches to women who expected lifelong partnership as a default outcome of their existence. When that outcome fails to materialize, the resulting isolation feels like betrayal rather than natural consequence. This sense of betrayal drives demands for restoration. Calls for men to man up, return to traditional roles, provide without complaint, and love unconditionally grow louder in certain circles. Yet these appeals rarely address the preconditions that led to disengagement. They assume men remain eager participants waiting for permission to re enter. The reality differs. Men have recalibrated expectations downward. They no longer view partnership as an essential component of a good life. Many see it as an optional, high risk endeavor that requires extraordinary compatibility to justify the costs. Compatibility, in turn, demands mutual respect, shared values, realistic expectations, and willingness to compromise, qualities that appear less common in the current environment. The financial dimension deserves closer examination. Women who once relied on dual income households to afford urban lifestyles now face the prospect of single income realities that strain budgets. Rent. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Mortgages, student loans, healthcare premiums, childcare. The cumulative burden grows heavier without a partner's contribution. Government programs offer partial relief, but rarely cover the full gap. Meanwhile, men who have downsized their lifestyles discover they need far less to thrive. A paid off vehicle, modest housing, bulk grocery shopping, and avoidance of lifestyle inflation create substantial monthly surpluses. These surpluses fund travel, education, equipment for hobbies, or early retirement planning. The contrast is stark. One group experiences increasing pressure to maintain appearances and security, while the other group experiences expanding freedom through simplicity. Social consequences extend beyond individuals. Declining marriage rates and birth rates signal long term demographic shifts. Fewer children mean aging populations, strained pension systems, and reduced economic dynamism. Communities built around family structures weaken when fewer families form. Schools, churches, neighborhood associations all feel the impact when participation drops. The argument that these changes represent progress toward individual liberation collides with the observable reality of widespread dissatisfaction among those who pursued that liberation most aggressively. Men who have stepped away report improved mental clarity, reduced anxiety, and greater self esteem. They no longer measure worth through female approval or relational success. They build identities around competence, discipline, and personal achievement. This shift represents a profound cultural realignment. For centuries, male value derived largely from provision and protection within family and community contexts. When those contexts become optional or actively discouraged, men redirect energy inward. The result is a generation increasingly comfortable existing outside traditional scripts. Women confronting this new landscape must navigate uncharted territory. The strategies that worked in previous eras, emphasizing youth and beauty, leveraging social pressure, expecting provision as default, no longer produce the same results. Men respond to incentives, not guilt trips or moral appeals. If the incentives point toward detachment, detachment persists. Changing the outcome requires changing the incentives, demonstrating genuine appreciation, offering reciprocity, reducing adversarial framing, rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than declarations. Until those changes occur, the current trajectory continues. Men build lives of quiet abundance. Women grapple with the gap between expectation and reality. Valentine's Day becomes less a celebration and more a reminder of what has been lost, not through malice, but through the cumulative weight of choices made over decades. The crack in the glass, once hairline, has widened into a visible fracture. Whether it can be repaired depends on willingness to acknowledge the forces that created it and the courage to address them honestly. The conversation around these dynamics often devolves into to finger pointing. One side accuses the other of entitlement, selfishness, or unrealistic standards. Yet both sides if operate within the same incentive structure. Women respond to cultural permission to prioritize self over partnership. Men respond to cultural signals that partnership carries disproportionate risk. Neither group acts in a vacuum. The broader society shaped the conditions, and now society experiences the consequences. Understanding this requires stepping back from immediate grievances to examine root causes. Modern individualism promised liberation from traditional constraints. It delivered freedom for some, isolation for others. The promise that women could thrive independently while men adapted quietly ignored fundamental differences in how each gender experiences solitude and connection. Men can sustain long periods of low social input without severe distress. Women typically require higher levels of emotional exchange to maintain well being. When supply drops, demand does not simply disappear, it intensifies, often manifesting as frustration or desperation. This intensity appears in subtle ways: increased cosmetic procedures to extend perceived youth, aggressive pursuit of status symbols to signal value, public venting about male shortcomings. Each behavior reveals underlying anxiety about diminished options. Men observe these patterns and reinforce their decision to remain distant. The cycle feeds itself. Breaking the cycle demands uncomfortable honesty. Women must confront the possibility that some aspects of modern empowerment came at the cost of relational capital. Men must consider whether permanent withdrawal serves long term flourishing or merely avoids short term pain. Both groups benefit from environments that reward mutual investment rather than penalize it. Until that environment emerges, the withdrawal continues. Men find peace in solitude. Women search for the intimacy that feels increasingly out of reach. The divide grows not through hatred, but through adaptation to changed realities. And as it grows, the question becomes not whether men will return, but whether the terms under which they might consider returning can ever be met. The economic collapse many predicted has not arrived as a sudden crash, but as a slow erosion. Wages fail to keep pace with costs. Debt levels rise. savings rates fall. In this environment, the ability to live comfortably on less becomes a superpower. Men who mastered this skill early now enjoy insulation from volatility. Women who built lifestyles assuming dual incomes or institutional support face exposure. The disparity widens. Social media amplifies every stage of this process. Viral posts showcase extremes. Women celebrating solo luxury while privately struggling. Men documenting peaceful routines that exclude romantic pursuit. Each side consumes content that confirms existing biases. Echo chambers harden positions. Dialogue shrinks, yet beneath the noise, quiet shifts occur. Some women begin reevaluating priorities, seeking partners who value traditional complementarity without domination. Some men soften boundaries when encountering genuine respect and reciprocity. These exceptions remain rare, but they point toward possibility. The majority, however, continues along established paths. Men protect their peace. Women mourn its absence. Valentine's Day passes each year as a stark reminder. Gifts go unbought. Messages go unsent. Tables set for one multiply. The fracture deepens, not because anyone intended destruction, but because incentives pulled in opposite directions for too long. Realignment requires more than sentiment. It requires structural change in how value is signaled, risk is distributed, and respect is earned. Until then, the story unfolds as it has. Men walking away, finding reward in the distance, while women confront the quiet that follows. The realization settles in slowly for most, like fog rolling over a city until the outlines of buildings disappear and only the muffled sounds remain. Women who built careers, accumulated credentials, traveled extensively, and curated lives of apparent abundance now sit in apartments that feel too large or too quiet, scrolling through feeds filled with images of other people's partnerships while wondering where their own version went wrong. The script they followed promised that delaying commitment until everything else aligned would result in better outcomes, more mature choices, stronger foundations, deeper compatibility. Instead, the delay often produced narrower options. The men who once orbited their social circles have either paired off with women who made different timing decisions or have simply vanished into lives that no longer include regular romantic pursuit. The marketplace has changed, and the currency of youth, fertility signals, and perceived flexibility has depreciated faster than anticipated. Men, meanwhile, have become connoisseurs of low drama existence. They wake up without the low grade anxiety of wondering whether today's interaction will be dissected later as problematic. They exercise, read, cook basic but nourishing meals, maintain a handful of solid friendships built on shared interests rather than obligation, and watch their bank accounts grow incrementally through disciplined habits. Compound interest, both financial and personal, works in their favor when energy is not constantly diverted into appeasement or performance. A man who once spent weekends planning dates, buying gifts, remembering preferences, and navigating emotional minefields now spends the same hours lifting weights, learning new skills, or simply sitting in silence with a book and coffee. The difference in cortisol levels alone makes the trade feel worthwhile. This quiet thriving escapes notice in mainstream discussions because it lacks drama. Content that generates engagement thrives on conflict, heartbreak, outrage. A man calmly explaining that he prefers his current setup over the relational turbulence of the past decade does not go viral. A woman tearfully asking why no one approaches anymore does. The algorithm rewards visible distress, so the narrative tilts toward portraying men as the problem. Avoidant, immature, porn addicted, video game obsessed, while framing women's loneliness as an injustice inflicted upon them. Yet the data tells a different story. Surveys show steadily rising life satisfaction among never married men in their 30s and 40s, particularly those who maintain modest lifestyles and strong platonic networks. The same surveys show declining satisfaction among similarly aged women who remain single, with spikes in reports of depression and anxiety tied directly to perceived lack of partnership prospects. The fertility window adds another layer of urgency that men do not experience symmetrically. A woman at 35 faces statistical realities around egg quality and conception, rates that a man at the same age does not. This biological asymmetry was always present, but cultural messaging spent decades downplaying it in favor of empowerment narratives. Career women were encouraged to freeze eggs, pursue promotions, and treat family as something that could be scheduled later, like a conference call. Technology offered partial solutions, but it could not rewrite timelines entirely. Now, women in that cohort confront the gap between what was promised and what materialized. Clinics report booming business in IVF and donor eggs, yet success rates remain stubbornly lower than natural conception in younger years. The financial cost compounds the emotional one. Tens of thousands of dollars for procedures that may or may not succeed, often shouldered alone. Men observe this from a distance and draw their own conclusions. They see women who once dismissed family oriented men as boring or controlling, now desperately seeking exactly those qualities in a narrower pool. The men who remained family focused often paired early with partners who valued those traits when they were less scarce. The remaining cohort consists disproportionately of men who either never wanted children or who have accepted childlessness as the price of independence. Appeals to step up and rescue fall flat when the asker spent years signaling that rescue was neither needed nor desired. Cultural gatekeepers attempt to reverse the tide through shame and nostalgia. Articles appear with titles asking where all the good men have gone, as though the disappearance were mysterious rather than predictable. Television shows and films recycle plots in which commitment phobic men eventually see the light and return to traditional roles, conveniently ignoring the real world incentives that make such returns unlikely. Influencers promote femininity boot camps, submission training, and vintage aesthetics as remedies, suggesting that cosmetic reversion to 1950s presentation will restore 1950s outcomes. These efforts misunderstand the core issue. Men did not walk away because women stopped wearing dresses. They walked away because the relational contract felt rewritten unilaterally in ways that increased risk and decreased reward. Trust, once eroded, rebuilds slowly, if at all. Every high profile false accusation, every viral thread celebrating a man's professional or social downfall over ambiguous behavior, every casual generalization about male nature as toxic or predatory adds another layer of caution. Men who might once have taken the risk of approaching now default to zero. The default costs nothing and risks nothing. It preserves dignity, resources, and peace. Women who want to change that default must make the alternative demonstrably safer and more rewarding than continued detachment. Some women are beginning to experiment with exactly that approach. They reduce public complaints, increase private appreciation, seek male perspectives without defensiveness, and show willingness to meet partners halfway on lifestyle and expectations. These women often report better results, not universal success, but noticeable improvement in interactions. The men who respond tend to be those who had not fully detached, who still held latent hope that reciprocity remained possible. The fully walked away cohort rarely notices these shifts because they have already rerouted their attention elsewhere. Economic stratification sharpens the divide further. Affluent men can afford to remain single indefinitely, enjoying travel, fine dining, cultural events, and philanthropy without needing a co pilot. Middle class men who master frugality achieve similar insulation on smaller budgets. Lower income men sometimes fall into patterns of resentment or despair. But even there, many choose video games, streaming, cannabis, or online communities over the additional stress of dating in a hostile climate. Across income levels, the option to disengage has become viable in ways it never was before. Women face steeper cliffs. Single motherhood remains the fastest route to poverty for women in many Western countries. Child support enforcement varies widely, and even when collected, it rarely covers the full cost of raising children alone. Career demands clash with parenting logistics. Dating as a single mother introduces another filter that shrinks options. The cumulative effect produces a growing underclass of women raising children without reliable male involvement, often relying on extended family, state aid, or sheer endurance. Meanwhile, childless men in their 40s report planning for early retirement, geographic freedom and legacy through mentorship, creative work, or charitable causes rather than biological descendants. They express no particular regret over the path not taken. The freedom to shape a life without compromise feels like the ultimate luxury. This asymmetry fuels polarized online spaces. Certain forums collect stories of men thriving post detachment, sharing spreadsheets of net worth growth, photos of solo adventures, testimonials about reclaimed mental health. Other spaces compile screenshots of women's dating profiles demanding 6-figure incomes, 6-foot heights, six-pack physiques, and emotional availability without offering equivalent value in return. Both sides consume content that reinforces their worldview. Cross pollination rarely occurs, yet, cracks appear even in the hardest positions. Some men admit privately that complete isolation carries subtle costs, moments of wistfulness during holidays, curiosity about what a healthy partnership might feel like if the incentives align differently. Some women acknowledge that past behavior contributed to present outcomes and express willingness to change. These admissions rarely make headlines, but they represent the raw material from which any bridge might eventually be built. The question hanging over the entire dynamic is whether structural incentives can shift before demographic momentum becomes irreversible. Birth rates in developed nations continue sliding toward levels that threaten long term economic stability. Social security systems designed for growing populations face shortfalls. Innovation slows when fewer young minds enter the workforce. Cultural vitality dims when family formation becomes exceptional rather than expected. Policy responses so far focus on symptoms rather than causes. Subsidized childcare helps, but does not address why fewer couples form in the first place. Paid family leave extends to fathers, but cannot create fathers where none exist. Housing initiatives lower barriers to entry, but do not make partnership more appealing. The missing piece remains cultural, a recalibration of messaging that treats mutual respect and realistic expectations as prerequisites rather than optional add ons. Until that recalibration happens, the current equilibrium persists. Men continue building lives of deliberate simplicity and self sufficiency. Women continue navigating the consequences of choices made under different assumptions. Valentine's Day arrives each February like clockwork, delivering its annual dose of clarity. Bouquets go unpurchased, reservations go unmade. Social media timelines fill with solo celebrations framed as empowerment. Yet the captions carry an undertone of explanation, as though justifying the absence to an invisible audience. The audience, however, has largely stopped watching. They have turned their attention to sunrises viewed alone, books finished without interruption, bank balances that grow without negotiation, and mornings that begin on their own terms. Peace, once dismissed as loneliness in disguise, reveals itself as something harder won and more durable. Women who want access to that peace sharing arrangement must offer something the current market lacks: genuine safety, appreciation without scorekeeping, partnership without constant auditing, femininity that complements rather than competes. The bar is not impossibly high, but it requires consistency over time, not sporadic gestures. Men have learned patience in detachment. They will not abandon it for promises alone. The fracture line runs deep now. Whether it becomes a permanent chasm or eventually allows passage depends on who blinks first and what they offer when they do. For the moment, most men keep walking. The road ahead looks clear, quiet, and entirely theirs. Economic headwinds strengthen the case for detachment. Recessions come and go, but structural changes persist. Automation displaces routine jobs. Artificial intelligence accelerates that displacement. Traditional paths to middle class stability, college degree, steady employment, home ownership grow less reliable. Men who anticipated these shifts early positioned themselves accordingly. Skill stacking in high demand fields, multiple income streams, geographic arbitrage in lower cost regions. They weather volatility with minimal lifestyle impact. Women who bet on corporate ladders face different risks. Layoffs hit harder when single. Re entering the workforce after time away carries penalties. Networking events feel less valuable when personal life remains unfulfilled. The independence once celebrated now shows its brittleness under sustained pressure. In conversations that stay offline, away from performative outrage, a different tone emerges. Men speak of relief at no longer carrying invisible emotional labor. Women speak of exhaustion from carrying it all themselves. Both describe the same fatigue, though from opposite sides. The symmetry suggests common ground exists buried beneath layers of defensiveness and narrative. Finding that ground requires stripping away blame and examining incentives cold bloodedly. What conditions would make re engagement rational for men? Reciprocal effort, legal and financial reforms, reducing asymmetric risk in marriage and divorce. Cultural narratives that value male contributions without sarcasm or suspicion. Realistic standards that match market realities rather than fantasy checklists. What conditions would restore hope for women? Men willing to lead without domination. Appreciation expressed consistently rather than sporadically. Partnership framed as mutual enhancement rather than obligation fulfillment. Rejection of adversarial framing in public discourse. Neither side can force the other to move first. Movement happens when staying put becomes more painful than changing. For many men, that threshold has not been reached. Detachment still feels superior. For growing numbers of women, the pain threshold approaches faster. The coming years will reveal whether pain catalyzes adaptation or merely entrenches positions further. History suggests adaptation eventually wins, but the timeline can stretch across decades. In the interim, lives continue forming along separate tracks, one marked by quiet accumulation and self directed purpose, the other by increasing urgency and narrowing windows. Valentine's Day. 2026 has passed, leaving its usual residue of reflection. Another year begins. Men keep walking. The path remains open, the company optional, the destination self determined. The quiet accumulation of small freedoms begins to compound in ways that surprise even those who chose the path deliberately. A man who once measured weekends by how many social obligations he could fulfill now measures them by how many hours he can spend uninterrupted on a single pursuit. Whether restoring an old motorcycle in a rented garage, coding a personal project that might never see public release, mastering a martial art through consistent solo drilling, or simply walking city streets at dawn when the noise level drops to something almost meditative. These hours belong entirely to him. No explanations owed, no emotional receipts required. The absence of negotiation becomes its own form of abundance. Contrast that with the experience many women describe in private messages, late night group chats, or increasingly candid anonymous forums. They speak of carrying mental load that never quite lifts. Even in relationships that technically still exist, the emotional labor often falls disproportionately on them. Remembering birthdays of his extended family, planning the social calendar, initiating difficult conversations about the future, decoding subtle mood shifts, maintaining the aesthetic of coupledom for public consumption, while privately wondering why affection feels transactional. When that labor produces diminishing returns, fewer compliments, less initiative from the partner, more passive scrolling through phones during shared time, the calculation shifts. Some women conclude the relationship has already ended in all but name. Others stay because the alternative feels scarier. Starting over in a dating pool that seems shallower and colder with every passing birthday. The dating pool itself has undergone a transformation that receives surprisingly little honest discussion. Traditional venues, bars, bookstores, hobby classes, mutual friends have largely dried up as primary meeting places. Men no longer default to approaching in those settings. The risk reward math changed permanently after repeated cultural signals that any unsolicited interaction could be labeled creepy, predatory, or at minimum unwelcome. The remaining avenues are digital, and digital favors extreme selectivity. On major apps, the top decile of men by attractiveness, height, income presentation, and photo quality receive the overwhelming majority of matches and messages. Everyone else experiences near silence. After months or years of near zero reciprocation, many men delete the apps entirely. They do not rage quit in spectacular fashion. They simply stop logging in, unsubscribe from premium features, and redirect attention to offline priorities that actually respond to effort. Women who remain active on these platforms often report a paradox: endless options that somehow feel empty. Matches arrive, conversations begin, dates occur, yet follow through collapses at alarming rates. Ghosting has become normalized to the point where receiving a polite rejection feels almost courteous. The women who experience the most consistent success tend to be those who either secured early commitment before the shift accelerated or who radically adjusted presentation and expectations, lowering height filters, softening career bragging in bios, emphasizing warmth and playfulness over credentials. Even then, success remains fragile. One poorly timed comment, one perceived microaggression, one viral cautionary tale circulating in group chats, and momentum vanishes. This fragility breeds hypervigilance. Women scan every interaction for red flags, creating longer and longer lists of disqualifiers. The lists grow so comprehensive that very few men survive initial screening. Meanwhile, men who sense the screening process treat it like a job interview with impossible success criteria and withdraw before the first question. Both behaviors are rational responses to the same distorted environment, yet together they produce near total gridlock. Demographers watching these patterns warn of cascading effects beyond individual loneliness. When marriage age continues climbing and marriage rates continue falling, first birth age rises accordingly. Children born to older parents inherit different risk profiles, higher chances of certain genetic conditions, different socialization patterns from grandparents who may already be elderly or deceased. School systems prepare for smaller incoming classes. Universities face enrollment cliffs. Labor markets anticipate shortages in younger cohorts precisely when aging populations require more caregivers, more taxpayers, more innovators. Governments respond with financial carrots, tax credits for children, baby bonuses, subsidized housing for families, but the incentives arrive too late for many. The women who might have responded positively to such policies in their 20s now sit in their mid to late 30s, facing fertility treatments that cost more than the bonuses provide. The men who might have formed families under different cultural conditions now view children as optional luxuries rather than expected milestones. They calculate the 20-year financial commitment against their current trajectory of financial independence and usually choose the latter. In private conversations that never reach public timelines, some men articulate a surprising clarity about legacy. They speak of mentoring younger colleagues, funding scholarships anonymously, building open source tools that thousands use without ever knowing the creator's name, creating art or writing that might outlive them. These forms of impact feel cleaner than biological parenthood in an era where divorce can sever access to children anyway. The emotional risk stays lower. The financial control remains absolute. The contribution still registers as meaningful. Women who hear these explanations often react with disbelief or anger. They interpret the shift as selfishness rather than adaptation. Yet the same women frequently maintain rigid boundaries around their own non negotiables: career trajectory, geographic preference, lifestyle standards, emotional availability requirements. The symmetry escapes notice because the language differs. Men describe detachment as self preservation. Women describe selectivity as knowing their worth. Both are protecting finite resources: time, energy, vulnerability, money from environments perceived as extractive. The extractive perception runs in both directions now. Women worry that re engaging with men will mean returning to unequal domestic labor, emotional caretaking, financial dependence disguised as romance. Men worry that re engaging will mean exposure to divorce courts where assets split unevenly, alimony obligations that last years, child support payments that outlive the relationship itself, and social stigma that paints them as the villain by default. Neither worry is baseless. Family law statistics in most Western jurisdictions show predictable patterns. Women initiate the majority of divorces, receive primary custody in the majority of cases, and collect support payments in the majority of support eligible cases. Men who internalized those statistics years ago decided the game was not worth playing. Changing family law faces political headwinds because the current structure enjoys broad female support and institutional inertia. Proposals for presumptive 50 custody, alimony reform, or stricter enforcement of shared financial responsibility meet resistance framed as attacks on women's safety or children's best interests. Whether the framing is fair or not matters less than the outcome. The legal environment stays tilted in ways that discourage male participation in marriage and parenthood. Rational actors respond accordingly. Some cultural commentators suggest returning to religious or traditional communities where norms still favor early pairing and lifelong commitment. These communities do maintain higher marriage and birth rates, but they require buy in to entire value systems, gender roles, sexual ethics, child rearing philosophies that many modern individuals reject outright. Secular men and women who want partnership without the full ideological package find few viable subcultures offering it. Mainstream culture continues celebrating individual autonomy while quietly mourning the relational fallout. The mourning appears most visibly during seasonal emotional peaks: Valentine's Day, anniversaries, New Year's Eve, Mother's Day, wedding season, all function as pressure tests. Social media fills with curated happiness that invites comparison. Those outside the frame feel the contrast keenly. Women post selfies with captions insisting they are enough on their own, yet the insistence carries defensive energy. Men rarely post at all during these periods. They are busy with routines that do not require external validation. This difference in response style reveals another asymmetry. Women tend to process relational pain outwardly, seeking solidarity or solutions through sharing. Men tend to process it inwardly, seeking solutions through withdrawal and self reliance. The outward processing generates more visible content, shaping public perception that women suffer more. The inward processing generates less noise, creating the illusion that men do not suffer at all. Both perceptions distort reality. Reality shows most men who have detached report net positive life changes after an initial adjustment period. They describe sleeping better, arguing less, spending less, laughing more with friends who share similar outlooks, feeling more present in hobbies and work. The adjustment period typically lasts 6 to 18 months, time to grieve what might have been, rewire social habits, rebuild identity outside relational status. After that, momentum builds in the opposite direction. Re entering dating feels like voluntarily stepping back into a minefield they already escaped. Women who reach similar turning points, accepting that partnership may not materialize on prior terms, face a different recalibration. Some double down on independence, building wealth, travel circles, chosen families of friends. Others pivot toward intentional communities, co housing arrangements, or renewed focus on extended family. A smaller group begins studying male perspectives without immediate defensiveness, asking what concrete changes might restore trust. These women often discover that small, consistent demonstrations of respect and appreciation produce outsized results compared to grand declarations. The results remain uneven because trust operates on delayed discounting principles. Years of negative conditioning cannot be undone with months of positive behavior. Men who have fully internalized attachment require sustained evidence before lowering defenses. Sporadic efforts read as tactical rather than genuine. Consistency over years becomes the only credible signal. Meanwhile, the broader culture keeps moving. Artificial intelligence accelerates changes already underway. Virtual companions grow more sophisticated, offering non judgmental conversation, emotional simulation, sexual gratification without risk of rejection or accusation. Adoption rates climb fastest among men who already prefer low drama interactions. Women experiment with the technology too, but usage patterns differ. More for creative collaboration or productivity than for relational substitution. The gap widens further. Economic forecasts suggest the next decade brings more automation, more remote work, more geographic flexibility. Men already positioned for these trends, debt free, skill heavy, location independent, gain even greater freedom to opt out of social obligations. Women tied to urban centers, corporate offices, or school districts face tighter constraints. The mobility differential reinforces the detachment differential. Through all of it, the, the core question lingers unspoken in most public conversations. What would it actually take for large numbers of men to re engage on a scale that reverses current trends? The answer, when men give it privately, tends to cluster around a few themes: mutual accountability instead of unilateral demands, legal environments that distribute risk and reward more evenly, cultural messaging that treats male nature as flawed but redeemable rather than inherently toxic, partners who bring as much value as they expect, appreciation expressed habitually rather than conditionally. Until those conditions materialize at scale, the current pattern holds. Men continue refining lives of deliberate minimalism and maximal autonomy. Women continue navigating the tension between independence rhetoric and intimacy hunger. Seasonal reminders arrive on schedule. February 14th, June weddings, December holidays, each one quietly underscoring the distance that is opened. The distance is not hatred, it is adaptation. Adaptation to incentives that pulled apart what previous generations assumed would stay together. Whether those incentives can be rewired before the demographic and cultural consequences become locked in remains the open question of the decade. For now, the roads diverge. One leads through quiet mourning and self directed days, compounding freedom. The other leads through louder nights, unanswered questions, increasing urgency. Both groups walk their chosen paths with increasing certainty that turning back costs more than moving forward. The momentum of detachment has created its own gravity now, pulling more men into orbits that feel increasingly stable and self contained with each passing season. What began as a defensive posture, avoiding risk, conserving energy, sidestepping potential humiliation, has matured into an affirmative lifestyle choice for millions. These men do not spend their days brooding over lost love or plotting revenge against an abstract cultural force. They spend them executing routines that deliver consistent, predictable dopamine hits without the volatility that intimate relationships introduced. A morning run followed by black coffee and market analysis. Midday, focus work on a side project that pays incrementally better each quarter. Evening reading or skill practice or simple entertainment that requires zero emotional labor. Weekends structured around personal quests rather than couple compromises. The architecture of the day belongs to them alone. This architecture proves surprisingly resilient to external pressure. Family members who once asked pointed questions about settling down now receive neutral updates about recent hikes, new certifications, portfolio growth. Friends who married young sometimes express quiet envy when they see the freedom their single counterparts maintain. No custody schedules, no in law obligations, no deferred personal hobbies. The envy rarely translates into action because the married men understand the trade offs they accepted. They traded autonomy for companionship and children and social approval. The single men traded companionship for autonomy and kept the children optional. Neither path is objectively superior. Both exact costs. The difference lies in which cost each group finds more tolerable. Women confronting the same question arrive at different answers because the costs distribute unevenly across biology, culture, and law. A single woman in her late 30s who wants children faces a narrowing biological window that no amount of financial independence can widen. She can afford IVF, surrogacy, donor sperm, private schooling, nannies, but none of those substitute for the presence of a committed co parent who shares the midnight feedings, the school runs, the emotional scaffolding children need from both sides. The statistics on single mother outcomes remain stubborn. Higher poverty risk, higher stress markers, lower reported life satisfaction compared with two parent households. Women know these numbers. Many still choose the path because the alternative, settling for a man they do not fully respect or desire, feels like a different form of suffering. Settling has become the third rail of modern discourse. Women who admit considering it face immediate backlash from peers who frame any compromise as betrayal of feminist gains. Yet the same women quietly notice that the men they once dismissed as safe or boring are the ones now thriving in stable marriages, while the exciting, high status men from their 20s have either locked into child free lifestyles or paired with younger partners who arrived at different conclusions about timing. The pattern repeats across social strata. The charismatic entrepreneur who once dated multiple women simultaneously now posts occasional photos with a quiet wife, half his age, and their infant. The former corporate climber who ghosted reliable suitors now scrolls past engagement announcements from those same suitors and their wives. Regret does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a sustained low hum beneath curated confidence. Men rarely voice equivalent regret because their window for family formation stretches further and their social penalty for childlessness remains lighter. A 50-year-old single man with money, health, and hobbies can still find willing partners if he chooses. He can also choose not to and suffer no significant status loss among peers. A 50-year-old single woman faces narrower romantic options and heavier cultural judgment, even in progressive circles. The asymmetry fuels resentment on one side and indifference on the other. Resentment seeks an outlet, indifference simply continues forward. The indifference manifests most clearly in how men allocate attention. They no longer monitor women's social media narratives for cues about shifting standards. They do not consume viral threads dissecting where the good men went. They do not engage in debates about red flags or body counts or financial minimums. They have tuned out the frequency entirely. The bandwidth once spent decoding mixed signals now goes toward learning options trading, building muscle memory for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, planning multi month travel routes through countries with favorable exchange rates, or quietly stacking real estate holdings that generate rising cash flow. Each pursuit reinforces the same lesson. Effort invested in self yields reliable returns. Effort invested in modern courtship yields unpredictable and often negative returns. This lesson hardens over time. A man who survives 2 or 3 false starts, women who love bombed, then devalued, relationships that collapsed over ambiguous offenses, divorces that cost 6 figures in legal fees, reaches a point where the perceived probability of a positive outcome drops below the threshold required to justify renewed effort. Behavioral economics calls this learned helplessness, but the term misses the mark here. The detachment is learned agency. The man has learned that removing himself from the game entirely produces better outcomes than continuing to play under current rules. He does not feel helpless, he feels strategic. Women attempting to rewrite those rules face an uphill battle because they must overcome not just individual skepticism, but collective precedent. Every time a woman publicly demands that men step up without first demonstrating what stepping up actually gains them, the precedent strengthens. Every time a viral post celebrates a man's downfall over a misinterpreted text message, the precedent strengthens. Every time divorce court horror stories circulate without counterbalancing stories of fair outcomes, the precedent strengthens. Men observe the pattern and adjust expectations downward. The bar for re engagement rises in direct proportion to the perceived hostility of the environment. Some women recognize this dynamic and begin experimenting with counter signals. They delete old posts that generalize negatively about men. They replace complaint threads with appreciation posts directed at specific positive male behaviors they witness. They initiate conversations with male friends or colleagues by asking genuine questions about their interests rather than venting about dating frustrations. These small pivots sometimes yield surprising receptivity. Men who had written off the entire gender notice when an individual behaves differently. The noticing does not guarantee immediate pursuit. Trust rebuilds slowly, but it reopens a narrow channel of communication that had closed. The channel remains narrow because most men have already filled their social and emotional needs elsewhere. Male friendships have deepened in the vacuum left by romantic pursuit. Men meet regularly for lifting sessions, poker nights, camping trips, or simply long conversations over whiskey about markets, philosophy, history, or nothing at all. These friendships carry zero risk of romantic rejection, financial entanglement, or legal exposure. They provide camaraderie, laughter, accountability, and occasional tough love without the volatility that intimate partnerships introduced. Many men report that these bonds feel more reliable than the relationships they once chased. Women, by contrast, often find their closest friendships strained by divergent life paths. Single friends drift toward different priorities than married friends with children. Career focused women find less common ground with those who stepped back from professional ladders. The result is a social landscape that feels increasingly fragmented. Chosen family becomes the buzzword, but chosen family lacks the automatic permanence that blood or lifelong partnership once provided. When crises hit, health scares, job loss, grief, the absence of a committed partner becomes stark. The starkness drives some women toward extreme coping mechanisms. Elective egg freezing has become normalized among high earning professionals in their late 20s and early 30s. The procedure offers psychological insurance more than practical guarantee. Success rates remain modest, costs remain high, and the underlying desire for a partner does not disappear. Other women turn to sperm banks and solo motherhood by choice, accepting the trade offs in exchange for control over timing. Still others double down on career and travel, framing childlessness as liberation rather than loss. Each choice represents an adaptation to the same reality. The pool of willing, capable, attractive male partners has shrunk, and the remaining men show little urgency to expand it. That lack of urgency stems partly from improved alternatives to partnership. Virtual reality environments grow more immersive every year. AI companions simulate emotional attunement with increasing fidelity. Pornography evolves toward interactive formats that remove performance pressure. None of these substitutes fully replicate human connection, but they reduce the perceived necessity of it. A man who can satisfy physical desire, experience simulated intimacy, and maintain real world male friendships finds the marginal utility of a live in partner dropping rapidly. The calculus shifts from "I need a woman to feel complete" to "a woman would be nice if she added net value without introducing disproportionate cost." Women face no equivalent suite of low risk substitutes. The emotional and physical intimacy they seek requires another conscious human being who chooses reciprocity. Technology can distract or numb, but it cannot fulfill the deepest wiring. This mismatch explains why visible distress tilts heavily female in public forums. The pain is real, and it is not symmetrical. Cultural attempts to rebalance the equation continue arriving in waves. Matchmaking services targeting high net worth individuals promise vetted partners and NDAs. Traditionalist influencers promote biblical femininity or red pill awareness for women as solutions. Policy advocates push for marriage incentives, divorce reform, custody presumption changes. Each wave meets resistance or indifference. The incentives that drove detachment remain stronger than the countermeasures deployed so far. So the divergence continues. Men refine systems that deliver steady state contentment. Women search for pathways back to connection that do not require total surrender of hard won independence. Seasonal markers arrive and pass. Another Valentine's Day, with its ritualized reminders of who is paired and who is not. The reminders lose some sting for men who have fully internalized the new normal. For women still hoping for reversal, each passing February sharpens the contrast between expectation and delivery. The contrast does not resolve through wishing or shaming. It resolves, if it resolves, through tangible shifts in risk reward perception. Men will re engage when the perceived probability of net positive outcome exceeds the perceived probability of net negative outcome. That threshold moves higher every year that passes without meaningful change in law, culture, or individual behavior. For the moment, most men keep walking forward on paths they paved themselves. The scenery changes slowly. New cities, new skills, new levels of financial breathing room, but the direction holds steady. Autonomy feels less like a consolation prize and more like the main event. Women watching those paths recede face a choice that grows heavier with time. Adapt expectations to current realities and build lives of meaning without guaranteed partnership. Or continue signaling openness to terms that men increasingly view as unfavorable. The first path offers control and dignity, but risks permanent solitude. The second path offers hope of connection, but risks repeated rejection or compromise that feels like diminishment. Neither path looks easy. Both require courage. Both require acceptance that the old scripts no longer apply. The new scripts are still being written, one quiet decision at a time. The divergence has reached a point where parallel realities coexist within the same cities, the same neighborhoods, sometimes even the same apartment buildings. On one floor, a man in his mid 30s finishes a home cooked steak dinner alone, reviews his monthly passive income report showing another five-figure increase from index funds and short term rental bookings, then settles into an evening of documentary watching or language study with no deadline and no one to answer to. Two floors up, a woman the same age finishes a takeout salad after a 12-hour workday, scrolls through dating app notifications that lead nowhere meaningful, checks her fertility app tracker that keeps pushing the optimal window further into the future she no longer controls, and feels the familiar tightness in her chest when silence replaces the background hum of shared life she once took for granted. These two scenes play out thousands of times every night across urban centers. They are not dramatic, they are ordinary. Yet, their ordinariness carries cumulative weight. The man's evening reinforces a feedback loop of competence and calm. The woman's reinforces a feedback loop of effort without commensurate payoff. Over months and years, the loops solidify into default states. Breaking out of a default state requires energy disproportionate to the perceived likelihood of success. Most people conserve energy when the odds look long. So the defaults persist. What makes the persistence feel irreversible to many observers is the way small daily choices aggregate into structural barriers. A man who has not approached a woman in public for 3 years loses the social calibration that once made approaching feel natural. His eye contact becomes briefer, his smile more perfunctory, his body language more closed. The skill atrophies not from disuse alone, but from deliberate disuse. He has trained himself to notice attractive women the way he notices interesting architecture, appreciation without intent to act. When a woman does give an opening, a lingering glance, a comment on the weather, he registers it, files it under interesting but irrelevant, and keeps walking. The moment passes. The habit strengthens. Women who notice the shift interpret it through the only lens available: rejection. They conclude men have collectively decided they are unworthy. The conclusion fuels a spiral. Makeup routines grow more elaborate, wardrobe choices more calculated, social media posts more performative, all in an attempt to recapture attention that has structurally relocated. The harder they push, the more artificial the effort appears to men who have already tuned out performative signals. Authenticity becomes the scarcest commodity in an environment saturated with optimization. Men who still engage romantically tend to gravitate toward women whose presentation feels effortless rather than engineered. Women who either never fully bought into the optimization arms race or who have consciously stepped back from it. Those women exist, but they remain outliers. Most have internalized the message that standing still equals falling behind. The result is a market where supply and demand operate on mismatched wavelengths. Women offer heightened versions of traits that were once sufficient: beauty, education, earning power, emotional expressiveness, while men have downgraded their demand for those traits in favor of lower conflict baselines: kindness without scorekeeping, loyalty without constant testing, presence without agenda. The mismatch produces widespread frustration because each side believes it is offering premium value while receiving discount responses. Premium value, however, comes with premium expectations. A woman who has spent a decade building a six-figure career, maintaining elite fitness, curating an aesthetic Instagram presence, and cultivating an interesting social circle expects a partner who matches or exceeds that level across multiple dimensions. The pool of men who can meet that bar and still choose traditional commitment has shrunk dramatically. Many high value men either paired early, embraced child free or poly adjacent lifestyles, or discovered they prefer the freedom that comes with not having to match someone else's escalation of standards. The remaining men who fit the profile often apply their own stringent filters: no history of adversarial public commentary about men, demonstrated ability to handle conflict without weaponizing social media, willingness to share domestic and emotional labor proportionally rather than rhetorically. These filters exclude large percentages of the candidate pool. The intersection of mutually acceptable candidates narrows toward zero in many urban zip codes. Zero-sum thinking creeps in when the intersection stays near zero for long enough. Women begin viewing other women as competition rather than allies. Men begin viewing partnership itself as a zero-sum transfer of resources rather than mutual gain. Trust erodes further. Conversations that might once have led to dates now end in polite exits because both parties sense the transaction costs outweigh potential benefits. The entire system grinds toward stasis. Stasis favors the party with lower time preference. Men with longer reproductive and social viability windows can afford to wait indefinitely. Women cannot. The asymmetry produces visible behavioral divergence. Women in their late 20s and early 30s flood fertility clinics, egg freezing consults, and freeze and thrive Facebook groups. They post about dating themselves while quietly calculating how many more years of peak fertility remain. Men in the same age range post about new passports stamped, new brokerage account milestones, new personal records in the gym. The content reflects different urgencies. Urgency drives innovation in unexpected places. Some women pivot toward international dating markets where traditional gender expectations remain stronger, and economic disparities create different incentive alignments. Apps catering to Western women seeking partners in Eastern Europe, Latin America, or Southeast Asia report surging female memberships. Success stories circulate: women who found men willing to relocate, start families, provide emotional steadiness without the cultural baggage accumulated in North American dating scenes. The trend remains niche, but grows steadily because it represents one of the few paths around domestic gridlock. Men explore parallel exits. Digital nomad visas multiply. Remote work opportunities concentrate in jurisdictions with low taxes and high quality of life. A 35-year-old software developer can earn San Francisco wages while living in Lisbon, Chiang Mai, or Medellin on half the cost. The lower cost base accelerates wealth accumulation. The change of scenery refreshes perspective. New cultures offer social environments where gender dynamics feel less adversarial. Some men stay permanently. Others return after a year or two with clearer boundaries and even less patience for domestic drama. Both exits, Women going abroad for partners, men going abroad for lifestyle, remove participants from the local mating market. The market thins further. Remaining players face longer odds. Desperation rises on one side, indifference solidifies on the other. Indifference does not equate to hatred. Most detached men harbor no active animosity toward women as a class. They simply treat romantic pursuit the way they treat multi level marketing schemes or penny stocks, interesting in theory, too risky in practice. They maintain cordial relations with female colleagues, sisters, cousins, friends of friends. They enjoy light flirtation when it occurs naturally and without agenda. They just no longer invest serious capital, emotional, financial, temporal, into an asset class that has delivered negative returns for too long. Women interpret the lack of investment as devaluation of their worth. The interpretation makes sense from their vantage point. They have been told since adolescence that their value peaks early and declines steadily. When investment stops arriving, the decline feels confirmed. Yet the withdrawal has less to do with women's objective value and more to do with men's subjective risk calculus. A woman can be exceptionally beautiful, kind, intelligent, accomplished, and still represent unacceptable downside exposure if the legal, cultural, and emotional environment remains unchanged. Changing that environment requires coordinated action across multiple domains. Family courts would need to default toward equal parenting time and eliminate lifetime alimony in most cases. Public discourse would need to retire blanket characterizations of male behavior as toxic and replace them with nuanced discussions of incentives and trade offs. Social media platforms would need to de amplify content that weaponizes personal disputes for viral reach. Universities and workplaces would need to stop framing gender relations as perpetual power struggles. None of these changes appears imminent. Incremental reforms occur. Some jurisdictions experiment with shared custody presumptions. A few high profile voices call for balance. But momentum stays slow compared with the speed at which detachment has entrenched. Entrenchment creates its own culture. Online spaces dedicated to male self improvement and minimalism grow into sprawling ecosystems. Podcasts discuss stoicism updated for the 21st century, financial independence, roadmaps tailored to single men, mental models for evaluating relational risk. Books on detachment philosophy sell steadily. Gyms fill with men in their 30s and 40s who train with the focus once reserved for competitive athletes. The culture rewards discipline, deferred gratification, self reliance. It does not explicitly discourage partnership, it simply makes partnership optional rather than foundational. Women develop parallel cultures centered on solo flourishing. She sheds replace home offices as aspirational spaces. Travel groups for women over 35 multiply. Financial literacy content aimed at single women surges. The messaging emphasizes empowerment through ownership of property, of time, of identity. The subtext acknowledges that waiting for a rescuer no longer makes sense. The rescuer either never arrives or arrives too late to fulfill the original vision. Both cultures produce genuine flourishing for some participants. A man who once felt chronic low grade anxiety around dating now reports consistent well being scores in the top quartile. A woman who once measured self worth through male attention now celebrates closing on her first investment property. The flourishing remains asymmetrical in one crucial dimension. Men's version tends to feel complete in itself, while women's version often carries an undertone of adaptation to absence rather than celebration of presence. The undertone surfaces most acutely during liminal moments, graduations, promotions, birthdays, illnesses, when the desire for a witness who shares history and future projections becomes sharp. Friends can witness, family can witness, chosen community can witness. Yet none fully substitutes for a partner who chose you above all other options and stayed through the mundane as well as the monumental. The gap persists even in lives that look enviable from the outside. Persistence of the gap drives ongoing experimentation. Some women initiate contact with men they previously overlooked, former classmates, co workers, acquaintances who never made the initial cut. The outreach sometimes succeeds when it arrives without entitlement or score settling. Men respond to directness, warmth, and clear reciprocity more favorably than they respond to hints or tests. Success rates remain low, but higher than passive waiting. Other women invest in therapy frameworks that focus on attachment repair and self regulation rather than external validation. They learn to tolerate solitude without panic, to articulate needs without accusation, to distinguish between healthy boundaries and defensive walls. The work produces internal shifts that occasionally translate into external results: calmer interactions, better partner selection, longer relationship durations when relationships do form. Men experiment too, though their experiments usually involve further optimization of independence rather than re entry into dating. They test geographic moves, career pivots, extreme frugality challenges, multi year travel sabbaticals. Each experiment tends to confirm the same finding. Autonomy scales upward with almost no diminishing returns, while relational investment scales downward under current conditions. The confirmation bias strengthens. Detachment becomes less a reaction and more an identity. Partnership becomes less a goal and more a contingency. The contingency carries stricter terms with every year that passes, demonstrated emotional stability over time, legal risk mitigation through prenuptial clarity, mutual financial independence as baseline rather than aspiration, shared worldview on gender roles rather than perpetual negotiation. Women who meet those terms exist but remain statistically rare. The rarity reinforces the contingency mindset. The mindset reinforces the rarity. The loop turns. Outside the loop, society ages. Elementary schools consolidate, college towns lose vibrancy, nursing homes multiply faster than maternity wards. Economists warn of dependency ratios that threaten fiscal stability. Politicians promise baby bonuses and housing vouchers while avoiding the upstream cultural questions. The questions linger because they require uncomfortable admissions that incentives matter more than intentions, that consequences outlast rhetoric, that walking away can become permanent when the path back fills with obstacles. For now, the paths remain separate. Men continue building quiet empires of one. Women continue navigating the tension between autonomy and longing. February turns to March. Another season begins. The distance holds steady, not because anyone wills it, but because no one has yet assembled a compelling enough reason to close it at scale. The consequences of this sustained withdrawal ripple outward in directions that few predicted when the initial cultural signals first went out decades ago. Cities that once pulsed with the energy of young families forming and expanding now show visible signs of aging at an accelerated pace. Playgrounds sit empty for long stretches of the day. Elementary school enrollment numbers drop year after year in districts that used to struggle with overcrowding. Local businesses that catered to young parents, family restaurants, indoor play centers, baby supply stores, either pivot to different demographics or quietly close their doors. The commercial real estate market begins to reflect the same pattern. Demand for large 3 and 4 bedroom homes in family friendly suburbs softens, while demand for compact 1 and 2 bedroom units in walkable urban cores rises among both single men and single women who have no children to accommodate. The housing market does not crash outright, but it reshapes itself around smaller household sizes and lower fertility expectations. This reshaping carries downstream economic effects that compound over time. Fewer children today means fewer workers tomorrow. Fewer workers tomorrow means a smaller tax base supporting an expanding elderly population. Public pension systems, already strained in many developed nations, face actuarial projections that grow steadily darker with every year of sub replacement fertility. Governments respond with the usual toolkit: raising retirement ages, increasing payroll taxes, reducing benefit generosity. Each adjustment lands hardest on younger cohorts who already feel squeezed between stagnant real wages and rising costs. Young men who have already opted for minimalism and self directed lives absorb these pressures more easily than young women who still carry the biological deadline of family formation. The man who needs only $25,000 a year to maintain his chosen standard of living can weather tax increases and benefit cuts without dramatic lifestyle erosion. The woman who structured her life around the dual income assumption required to afford urban rent, student loan payments, professional wardrobes, and fertility treatments finds the same policy changes far more disruptive. The disruption manifests in different ways across socioeconomic strata. In upper middle class circles, women who delayed childbearing to establish careers now face the double hit of diminished fertility and diminished partner options. They turn to reproductive endocrinologists, spend tens of thousands on assisted reproduction, and still face success rates that decline sharply with age. When cycles fail repeatedly, some shift to donor eggs or adoption. Both paths carry steep financial and emotional costs. Donor egg children are genetically unrelated to the mother who carries them, which introduces identity questions that some women find difficult to reconcile long term. Adoption processes are lengthy, expensive, and increasingly competitive as fewer infants become available for placement in Western countries. The women who pursue these routes often describe the journey as empowering in public while privately admitting to profound grief over the natural path that closed before they were ready to walk it. In working class and lower middle class communities, the picture looks starker. Women who once relied on informal networks of male provision, fathers, brothers, partners, extended family, now confront the absence of those networks. Men in these communities have exited not only romantic pursuit, but often the formal workforce as well, choosing combinations of disability benefits, cash based side work, living with parents longer, or simply scaling back consumption to match reduced income. The women left behind shoulder more of the burden of child rearing, elder care, and household maintenance without the offsetting contributions once expected. Community cohesion frays as trust in institutional support erodes and informal support from men disappears. The result is a slow hollowing out of social capital that makes daily survival feel heavier for women than for men who have already minimized their dependencies. Minimization becomes the operative strategy across wide swaths of the male population. Men who once viewed homeownership as a milestone of adulthood now see renting as a feature rather than a bug. Mobility trumps permanence when economic or cultural conditions feel unstable. A man who can pack his possessions into a single vehicle and relocate to a lower cost region within weeks has a strategic advantage over someone tethered to a mortgage, a school district, or a partner's career. The advantage compounds when the man has no children requiring stability. He can chase opportunities, remote contracts, crypto arbitrage, real estate flips in emerging markets without dragging a family along or negotiating with a co parent. The freedom to move quickly and unilaterally becomes one of the most valued assets in an era of rapid technological and economic churn. Women face the opposite calculus. Relocation for career advancement becomes riskier when no partner provides a fallback income stream. Moving to a new city for a promotion means rebuilding a social network from scratch, often without the buffer of a spouse who can help share housing costs or provide emotional grounding during transition periods. Single women who attempt these moves frequently report higher rates of loneliness and burnout compared with their male counterparts. The same structural realities that make mobility an advantage for men make it a hazard for women who still seek partnership and family. The asymmetry widens the experiential gap between the genders, even when both groups technically occupy the same labor market. Labor market dynamics themselves begin to reflect the withdrawal. Industries that depend on young workers, retail, hospitality, entry level white collar roles, face persistent staffing shortages in many regions. Employers raise wages to attract applicants, but the wage increases rarely keep pace with inflation in housing and childcare costs. Young women who might once have entered these fields to gain independence now weigh the numbers and conclude that full time work barely covers basics when rent and transportation consume most of the paycheck. Some opt for part time arrangements, gig work, or living with family longer than previous generations did. Others leave the workforce entirely, relying on parental support, government assistance, or relationships that provide financial backing. The pattern feeds back into the broader withdrawal. As fewer young women participate in the labor force, the pool of economically independent women shrinks, making traditional provider roles less necessary for men, while simultaneously making provider roles more attractive for the women who remain in the market. Men, meanwhile, cluster in fields that reward individual performance over social coordination. Software development, quantitative trading, skilled trades with independent contracting options, content creation, and niche online businesses all allow men to earn well while minimizing workplace drama and office politics. These fields also tend to have higher concentrations of men who share similar life philosophies: low time preference, high agency, skepticism toward institutional promises. The clustering creates reinforcement loops. A man surrounded by peers who thrive on independence finds it easier to dismiss relational pressure as outdated or irrational. The peer group normalizes detachment as the intelligent default rather than a temporary reaction. The normalization extends to younger cohorts. Boys growing up now see older brothers, uncles, cousins, and online figures living lives of deliberate solitude and self sufficiency. They observe the stress their married peers experience: divorce proceedings, custody battles, alimony payments, child support garnishments, and internalize early that marriage and fatherhood carry liabilities far heavier than benefits. Many decide before they ever enter the dating market that they will avoid the entire apparatus. They focus on education, skills, fitness, and financial literacy instead. By the time they reach their 20s, they have already built lives that do not structurally require a female partner. The pipeline of future detachment grows thicker with every year. Women in the same age groups face a different socialization process. They are still told that partnership and motherhood remain central to fulfillment, even as the practical pathways to those outcomes narrow. Schools, media, and social circles emphasize empowerment through career while quietly assuming that romantic success will arrive as a byproduct of being an impressive woman. When the byproduct fails to materialize, the dissonance produces confusion, anger, and eventually resignation. Some women channel the energy into hyperachievement in other domains: building businesses, amassing credentials, traveling extensively, while others retreat into coping mechanisms that range from substance use to compulsive consumption to immersion in online communities that validate their experience. Neither response closes the underlying gap. The gap itself has become a kind of cultural fact that almost everyone feels, but fewer openly name. Public conversations still dance around the edges. Articles about declining birth rates, podcasts about loneliness epidemics, think tank reports on demographic winter, without directly connecting the dots to the sustained, rational withdrawal of men from the romantic and familial marketplace. When the connection is made, it is usually framed as a problem men must solve rather than a predictable outcome of incentives men faced. The framing ensures that solutions remain cosmetic. Dating app tweaks, tax credits for children, public campaigns celebrating fatherhood. These measures treat symptoms while leaving the root incentives untouched. Untouched incentives continue producing the same result. Men walk further. Women feel the distance more keenly. Society ages faster than its institutions can adapt. The mismatch between biological reality and cultural programming grows more visible with every passing year. A woman who reaches 40 without children or a stable partnership confronts a future that looks very different from the one she was prepared to expect. A man who reaches 40 with financial independence, health, and freedom confronts a future that looks better than he once dared to hope. The contrast sharpens every February. Another Valentine's Day passes with fewer couples exchanging gifts, fewer families booking restaurants, fewer public displays of romantic investment. The holiday shrinks in cultural significance for men who have already withdrawn and expands in symbolic weight for women who still seek the affirmation it once reliably provided. The ritual becomes a yearly audit of who is still participating and who has left the game entirely. Leaving the game entirely no longer feels like defeat. For growing numbers of men, it feels like victory over a system that demanded endless performance while offering diminishing returns. The victory is quiet. It does not require public proclamation. It simply requires consistency. Waking up each morning on one's own terms, directing resources towards self determined ends, maintaining boundaries that protect peace, and refusing to re enter arrangements that have repeatedly demonstrated net negative outcomes. Women who observe this quiet victory from the outside experience it as abandonment. They feel the absence of pursuit, provision, protection, and presence. The feeling is real, yet the abandonment was not arbitrary. It followed years of messages telling men their pursuit was unwanted, their provision optional, their protection presumptuous, their presence potentially dangerous. Men listened. They internalized the instructions. They acted accordingly. Now, the consequences arrive not as punishment, but as logic working itself out over time. Logic cannot be argued with indefinitely, it can only be accepted or evaded. Evasion grows harder as the demographic, economic, and social indicators keep pointing in the same direction. Acceptance, when it finally occurs, requires looking at the chain of decisions that produce the current landscape and deciding whether the chain can be broken or must simply be lived with. For the moment, most men have chosen to live with the consequences they helped create. They have accepted solitude as a fair trade for sovereignty. They have accepted lower social status in exchange for higher personal control. They have accepted the absence of biological heirs in exchange for the presence of uninterrupted time and energy. The trade feels equitable to them. Women face a different set of trades. They can accept reduced expectations in partners and accelerated timelines for family formation. They can accept childlessness or solo parenthood as the price of maintaining previous standards. They can accept that the cultural tide that once favored their timeline no longer does. Each option carries weight. None feels like the victory they were promised. The promise itself was always conditional on continued male participation under shifting terms. When participation collapsed, the promise collapsed with it. The collapse was not sudden, it was gradual, rational, and self reinforcing. Reversing it will require more than sentiment or policy patches. It will require a fundamental reordering of incentives across law, culture, economics, and individual behavior. Until that reordering happens at meaningful scale, the trajectory remains clear. Men continue walking away. The distance grows. The consequences accumulate. Society adjusts to a new equilibrium in which partnership becomes optional for half the population and increasingly elusive for the other half. The adjustment is not painless, it is simply inevitable under the current rules. The rules have not changed because the players who benefit most from them have no urgent reason to rewrite them. Men benefit from autonomy. Institutions benefit from atomized individuals who are easier to tax, monitor, and manage. The coalition of interest that sustains the status quo outweighs the coalition that would prefer restoration of older norms. Change, if it arrives, will come slowly and probably from the margins rather than the center. In the meantime, the margins grow, more men exit, more women confront the gap, more children are never conceived, more infrastructure built for larger populations begins to feel oversized. More conversations about loneliness and collapse fill public discourse without ever naming the primary driver. The driver is simple. Men walked away because they could. They stayed away because it worked. They will keep staying away until the cost benefit equation flips decisively in the opposite direction. No amount of moralizing, shaming, pleading, or subsidizing has flipped it yet. The longer the equation remains unbalanced, the harder it becomes to rebalance. The story continues unfolding one quiet morning at a time. Men wake up, make coffee, check their accounts, plan their day, and move forward without apology. Women wake up, check their phones, scroll past another engagement announcement, feel the familiar ache, and decide how to carry it through another day. Both groups keep moving. The paths diverge further. The future takes shape around the space between them. The slow reshaping of physical and economic landscapes continues to reveal patterns that were once hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Suburban developments that broke ground 15 years ago with four-bedroom floor plans and backyard swing sets now stand half occupied, their cul-de-sacs quiet except for the occasional delivery truck. Builders quietly shift toward denser townhome clusters and single-level condos marketed to empty nesters and child-free professionals. Retail chains that once anchored family shopping centers, big box toy stores, mid price furniture outlets, chain restaurants with kids eat free nights either rebrand toward experiential dining for adults or vacate entirely. The vacancy signs linger longer than they used to. Commercial landlords adjust rents downward in those corridors while raising them in neighborhoods where young singles and dink couples cluster around walkable amenities, rooftop bars, and co working spaces that never close. This physical recalibration mirrors a deeper financial one. Household formation rates, the metric economists use to track how many new independent living units people create each year, have trended downward for over a decade and show no sign of reversal. When fewer households form, consumer spending patterns shift away from durable goods associated with family life. Minivans, bunk beds, backyard play sets, college savings plans, and toward experiences and personal upgrades, luxury travel, high-end fitness equipment, premium audio systems, collectible sneakers, subscription boxes curated for individual tastes. The economy does not shrink outright, it reallocates. Companies that once targeted parents now target the perpetually single adult with disposable income and no dependents. Marketing departments rewrite personas, product lines pivot, advertising budgets follow the money. The money flows most freely to those who mastered low overhead living early. Men who locked in low mortgage rates or paid cash for modest properties during the post 2020 dip now sit on appreciating assets while their monthly obligations remain fixed. Inflation erodes the real value of their debt, Rising rents erode the purchasing power of everyone still leasing. The advantage accrues quietly. A man paying $1,200 a month on a 30-year note fixed at 3% watches his equity build, while his neighbor pays $2,200 in rent that climbs 5% annually. Over 10 years, the spread becomes generational wealth in miniature. The man with the fixed obligation can redirect surplus cash into equities, precious metals, or side ventures. The renter must run faster just to stay in place. Women who delayed homeownership to preserve geographic flexibility or to avoid over-leveraging during uncertain career phases now face entry barriers that feel insurmountable without dual incomes. Median home prices in major metros have outpaced wage growth for so long that even six-figure earners hesitate to pull the trigger alone. Co-buying arrangements with friends or siblings emerge as workarounds, but they introduce new frictions, mismatched life goals, unequal contributions, eventual buyout disputes. The workarounds highlight the underlying reality. Partnership was once the default financial accelerator for homeownership and wealth building. When that accelerator vanishes, the climb becomes steeper and slower for those left without it. The climb steepens further when children enter the equation. Single mothers, whether by choice or circumstance, confront childcare costs that routinely exceed half their take home pay in high cost areas. After school programs, summer camps, private tutoring, the extras that middle class parents once viewed as standard now become luxury items. Public schools in many districts deteriorate under enrollment declines and funding formulas tied to headcount. Private options price out all but the top decile. Women raising children alone frequently report cutting personal spending to zero, deferring medical care, working second jobs, or moving back in with parents to survive. The stress compounds. Cortisol levels stay elevated. Sleep quality drops. Long-term health markers worsen. Men who opted out of fatherhood sidestep this entire cascade. They maintain baseline health care, consistent sleep, regular exercise, and nutritional habits that become easier to sustain without the chaos of child rearing logistics. Life expectancy differentials between married and never married men have narrowed in recent cohorts because the never married group avoids the chronic stress spikes associated with divorce, custody litigation, and ongoing financial obligations to ex partners. The data is still emerging, but early actuarial tables suggest a subset of deliberately single men may outlive their married counterparts by several years when controlling for income and education. Longevity advantages compound with financial ones. A man who reaches 65 with no alimony, no child support arrears, no college tuition obligations, and a paid off residence can retire on a fraction of the nest egg required for a man with ongoing liabilities. He can draw 4% annually from a smaller portfolio and still maintain comfort. The woman who reached the same age after solo parenting or after a late in life divorce often faces the opposite math. Fixed expenses that never scale down, healthcare premiums that rise exponentially, and social security checks that replace only a portion of prior earnings. The retirement gap between never married men and never married women widens with every passing decade. Widening gaps produce visible social stratification. Neighborhoods sort more aggressively by household type. Areas with high concentrations of single men feature more minimalist architecture, higher gym density, fewer strollers on sidewalks, more electric bikes and scooters parked outside mid-rise buildings. Areas with higher concentrations of single women or single mothers show different signatures. More daycare centers, more pediatric clinics, more budget grocery chains, more rideshare pickups at odd hours. The sorting happens organically through price signals and preference alignment. No central planner draws the lines. People simply move toward the environments that match their current life structure. Life structure, once fluid, hardens faster now. A man who spends 5 years living alone develops routines that resist disruption. His sleep schedule, meal prep rhythm, workout cadence, and leisure preferences all optimize for one person. Introducing a partner requires renegotiating every element. The negotiation cost feels prohibitive when the baseline already delivers high satisfaction. Many men reach the point where even an objectively attractive, compatible woman would require too much recalibration to justify the effort. The sunk cost of independence becomes a barrier to entry as real as any legal or financial one. Women who have spent the same 5 years building solo routines face a parallel but inverted barrier. Their independence was often forged reactively, after repeated disappointments, after failed relationships, after calculating that staying single preserved more dignity than settling. By the time they encounter a man who might fit, their own systems have calcified. They guard their space, their schedule, their emotional bandwidth. Trust takes longer to extend. Vulnerability feels riskier when past experience taught that opening leads to extraction rather than reciprocity. Both sides arrive at the same standoff, two fortified positions that neither wants to abandon first. The standoff extends to public behavior. Men no longer offer unsolicited compliments, hold doors as a default courtesy, or strike up casual conversation in mixed settings. The gestures once read as polite now carry perceived risk. Women notice the absence and interpret it as hostility or indifference. The interpretation widens the emotional distance further. Casual social friction that once greased everyday interactions disappears. People pass each other with eyes averted, earbuds in, interactions minimized to transactional necessities. The ambient level of warmth in public spaces drops measurably. Measurable drops in social warmth correlate with measurable rises in mental health interventions. Prescription rates for antidepressants and anti anxiety medications climb faster among women in their 30s and 40s than among men in the same bracket. Therapy waitlists lengthen. Online support communities dedicated to single women over 35 grow into the tens of thousands. The communities provide validation and coping strategies, but they rarely produce actionable paths back to partnership. The focus stays on self acceptance, boundary setting, and reframing solitude as chosen rather than imposed. The reframing helps many women maintain equilibrium. It does not restore the relational ecosystem that once existed. The ecosystem cannot be restored unilaterally. Men will not re enter in large numbers until the perceived downside risk falls below the perceived upside reward. That requires simultaneous movement on multiple fronts. So, legal reforms that make marriage and fatherhood less financially catastrophic, cultural narratives that stop treating ordinary male behavior as presumptively toxic, dating norms that reward reciprocity instead of punishing initiative, economic conditions that make dual income households less mandatory for basic stability. No single lever pulls the system back. All levers must move together, and none has moved decisively yet. Without decisive movement, the default trajectory continues. Fertility rates slide toward one child per woman in most developed nations. Median age creeps upward. Workforce participation among prime age men stabilizes at lower levels as more exit into self employment or early semi retirement. Women's participation holds steadier, but with higher burnout and turnover. Innovation concentrates in smaller, nimbler teams of unattached, high agency individuals. Large institutions grow slower, more bureaucratic, less adaptive. The overall pace of societal progress decelerates even as individual pockets of excellence shine brighter. The brightness of those pockets often belongs to men who have fully embraced the logic of detachment. They publish research, launch startups, create art, train successors, travel light, give anonymously, die with fewer regrets. Their lives look sparse from the outside, few photos with partners, no school recitals, no anniversary posts, but the internal ledger shows surplus time, energy, focus, money, all directed toward ends they chose without veto. Women who build parallel surpluses do so against steeper headwinds. They achieve the same professional milestones, the same financial independence, the same personal growth, yet the ledger often shows a persistent deficit in intimacy, shared history, witnessed milestones. The deficit cannot be filled with money or accomplishments alone. It requires another person who stays. When that person does not appear, the achievement feels hollower than it should. The hollowness surfaces in unexpected moments. A woman closes a major business deal and has no one to call first. A man finishes an ultra marathon and posts the medal photo to a group chat of other single men who understand the obsession. Both feel pride. Only one feels completion. Completion remains the dividing line. Men increasingly find it internally. Women increasingly search for it externally. The search grows more urgent as biological and social clocks tick louder. The internal sourcing grows more effortless as habits solidify. The two tracks diverge further with every sunrise. One leads toward ever greater sovereignty and ever smaller footprints. The other leads toward ever greater competence, shadowed by ever greater absence. Neither track promises happiness in the conventional sense. Both promise survival on self determined terms. Survival, in the end, is what the incentives have optimized for. Not flourishing together, not legacy through lineage, not mutual dependence. Survival alone, streamlined, low friction, high control. The optimization succeeded. The cost was connection. The cost keeps registering. In empty playgrounds, in quiet suburbs, in pharmacy lines for hormone replacement, in tax projections that no longer add up, in conversations that never start, in glances that never connect, in futures that arrive one person at a time. The futures keep arriving. Men keep walking. The path stays open behind them, but fewer follow. The path men have chosen does not end in isolation chambers or monastic silence. It ends in a form of streamlined existence that prioritizes signal over noise, leverage over labor, optionality over obligation. A 42-year-old former corporate analyst now lives in a paid off cabin on 5 acres outside a small mountain town. He wakes at 5:30 without an alarm, brews pour over coffee from beans he roasted himself the week before, reviews overnight crypto positions on a single monitor while the sun rises over ridges still dusted with snow. By 8, he has closed 2 trades that net him enough to cover the next 3 months of expenses. The rest of the day belongs to whatever calls loudest. Rebuilding the carburetor on a vintage dirt bike, splitting firewood for next winter, reading military history in a hammock strung between 2 pines, or driving into town to meet 3 other men who live similar lives for burgers and unhurried conversation about nothing that requires resolution. No one asks when he plans to settle down. No one expects him to explain his choices. The absence of expectation feels like oxygen after years of holding breath. This pattern repeats with variations across income brackets and geographies. In Phoenix, a 38-year-old welder who transitioned to mobile fabrication works 4 months out of the year on contract jobs that pay cash and leave him free the other 8. He rents a small house with a oversized garage, keeps a motorcycle collection that grows one piece at a time, spends winters riding Baja trails and summers fishing remote lakes in Montana. His monthly burn rate hovers below $2,000. When friends from his old construction crew text about overtime shifts or union negotiations, he replies with photos of empty desert roads at dawn. They stop asking why he left. They already know the answer. The math no longer worked. In Brooklyn, a 45-year-old day trader who once chased seven-figure bonuses now runs a disciplined micro fund from a one-bedroom walk-up. He wakes to pre-market futures, executes a narrow set of high-probability setups, closes positions by noon, then spends afternoons boxing at a gym that still smells like sweat and leather rather than scented candles. Evenings alternate between chess club meetups, jazz sets in small venues, and quiet dinners cooked from whatever looked good at the green market. His net worth grows steadily through compounding and low volatility. His social circle consists of other men who value the same rhythm: effort concentrated, reward predictable, drama non existent. When a woman from his past reaches out after seeing an old LinkedIn update, he responds politely, meets for coffee once, senses the familiar undercurrent of expectation, and lets the thread die naturally. No anger, no guilt, just recognition that the timeline no longer aligns. Women watching these lives from a distance often describe them as selfish or escapist. The description misses the central mechanism, calibration. Men have recalibrated downward the importance of romantic validation and upward the importance of internal congruence. The recalibration happened gradually through repeated exposure to outcomes that punished effort and rewarded withdrawal. Each cycle, approach, invest, encounter resistance or betrayal, exit, recover, observe, improve baseline, reinforce the lesson until the lesson became identity. Identity is harder to negotiate than behavior. A man who now identifies as someone who thrives in sovereignty does not easily revert to someone who thrives in negotiation. The reversion would require dismantling a self concept built over years of constant reinforcement. Women face a parallel but inverted identity challenge. Many have built self concepts around resilience, independence, and the belief that the right partner will arrive when the timing and credentials align perfectly. When the arrival never happens, the identity cracks under cognitive dissonance. Some women double down, insisting louder that they are enough alone while privately measuring the gap between declaration and felt experience. Others begin the slower work of identity revision, acknowledging that partnership was not merely a bonus, but a core component of their envisioned life, grieving its absence without self blame, and constructing meaning from alternate sources: deep friendships, creative output, mentorship roles, community leadership. The revision succeeds for some. For others, the dissonance lingers as chronic low grade dissatisfaction that no achievement fully erases. The dissatisfaction surfaces most acutely in intergenerational conversations. Mothers who raise daughters on messages of limitless possibility now watch those daughters reach 40 without the grandchildren they assumed would arrive. The mothers express confusion, concern, occasional anger directed at an entire gender rather than at the cultural machinery that shaped expectations. Daughters respond with defensiveness or quiet resignation. The exchange rarely produces resolution because neither generation fully grasped how thoroughly the incentive landscape changed between one cohort and the next. Grandmothers who married at 22 and built families on single incomes cannot fathom why granddaughters earning six figures hesitate to commit. Granddaughters cannot fathom why anyone would trade autonomy for dependence in an era when dependence so often ends in courtrooms. Courtrooms remain the unspoken backdrop to every calculation. Family law statistics have not softened. Women still initiate roughly 70 to 80% of divorces. Asset division still favors the lower earning spouse in most jurisdictions. Custody still defaults toward mothers in practice, even when statutes claim gender neutrality. Alimony and child support formulas still impose long tail liabilities that can last decades. Men who internalize those probabilities years ago treat marriage the way a prudent investor treats a security with asymmetric downside: interesting in theory, unacceptable in practice. The risk premium required to re enter that market keeps rising. No amount of romantic idealism offsets the actuarial reality. Actuarial reality also shapes how men approach legacy. Biological children are no longer the default vehicle for meaning beyond one's lifespan. Men increasingly channel legacy impulses into mentorship, open source contributions, scholarship endowments, land conservation, or creative work that carries their name without requiring daily caretaking. A 50-year-old who funds STEM scholarships for underprivileged boys feels the same quiet pride a grandfather might feel watching a grandson graduate, without the preceding 18 years of diaper changes, parent teacher conferences, and teenage rebellion. The pride arrives cleaner, on the man's timeline, without counterparty risk. Women who pursue similar non biological legacies, foundations, authorship, teaching, often report satisfaction, but still carry an undercurrent of incompleteness tied to the absence of direct descendants who carry half their DNA. DNA transmission matters asymmetrically because women's reproductive window closes while men's remains open. A 60-year-old man can still father children with a younger partner if he chooses. A 60-year-old woman cannot. The asymmetry produces different emotional timelines. Men can defer family decisions indefinitely without biological penalty. Women cannot. The deferral penalty compounds interest over time, turning mild regret into acute grief for some and stoic acceptance for others. The divergence in timelines reinforces the divergence in behavior. Men relax into patience, women accelerate into urgency. Urgency drives visible behavioral shifts. Women in their late 30s and early 40s flood international dating platforms, fertility forums, and intentional community meetups searching for viable paths forward. Some relocate to countries where cultural norms still favor early marriage and larger families. Others join co housing projects designed around chosen family rather than romantic coupling. Still others invest heavily in freezing whatever fertility remains, accepting the high failure rate as better than zero optionality. Each strategy represents a pragmatic response to a closing window. None fully replicates the traditional sequence that previous generations took for granted. Previous generations took partnership for granted because the incentives aligned. Men gained status, sex, companionship, and household labor. Women gained provision, protection, social legitimacy, and children. Both sides perceived net gain. When the gains eroded through legal changes, cultural messaging, economic shifts, technological substitutes, the perception flipped to net loss for men and net uncertainty for women. The flip was not coordinated, it was emergent. Emergent outcomes resist simple reversal because no single actor controls the system. The system now runs on autopilot. Men continue optimizing for sovereignty because it delivers. Women continue searching for a connection because biology and socialization demand it. The mismatch produces a slow societal resorting, fewer marriages, fewer births, smaller households, older populations, weaker social bonds, stronger individual fortification. The resorting does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives in census data, school closure announcements, hospital maternity wing downsizings, and the gradual quieting of playgrounds once filled with noise. The quieting extends to public discourse. Conversations about gender relations grow more polarized in echo chambers and more muted in mixed company. People avoid the topic the way they avoid religion or politics at dinner parties. The avoidance preserves surface civility while allowing underlying tensions to deepen. When the topic does surface, on podcasts, in comment sections during holiday arguments, it quickly devolves into familiar scripts. Men accuse women of entitlement. Women accuse men of immaturity. Both sides cite statistics that support their priors. Neither side concedes ground. The scripts repeat because the incentives that produce them remain unchanged. Unchanged incentives produce predictable, long term equilibria. One plausible equilibrium is a permanently lower fertility trap. Birth rates stabilize around 1.2 to 1.4 children per woman. Populations age rapidly. Immigration becomes the primary demographic stabilizer. Cultural emphasis shifts further toward individual achievement and chosen networks rather than biological families. Another plausible equilibrium is partial reconvergence. Small but growing subcultures revive traditional norms through religious revival, geographic concentration, or deliberate countercultural movements, maintaining higher fertility while the broader society continues its slide. A third is technological mitigation, artificial wombs, widespread embryo selection, AI companions that approximate emotional intimacy, all reducing the felt necessity of traditional pairing. None of these equilibria restores the mid 20th century model. That model required a specific alignment of economic necessity, cultural permission, legal structure, and technological limitation that no longer exists. Attempting to resurrect it through nostalgia or coercion would likely accelerate the very withdrawal it seeks to reverse. Men do not return to games they have already solved as unwinnable. They keep walking instead. The walking looks different for each man. Some toward mountains, some toward cities, some toward digital frontiers, but the direction holds forward, away from obligation, toward whatever horizon offers the clearest view of self determined days. Women keep moving too, some toward acceptance of solo paths lined with meaningful work and chosen kinship, some toward aggressive pursuit of remaining options, international or otherwise, some toward quiet mourning that surfaces in private journals or late night conversations with trusted friends. The movement lacks the same unified direction because the destination remains contested. Partnership on revised terms, partnership on any terms, or peace without partnership at all. Peace without partnership has become the default male destination. It is not perfect. Moments of wistfulness still arrive during holidays after hearing a song from college years, when seeing an elderly couple walk hand in hand. But the wistfulness passes faster now. It no longer derails days or weeks. The baseline returns. Coffee brewing, markets opening, roads unspooling ahead, life continuing on terms that feel earned rather than negotiated. The earning happened through subtraction more than addition, subtracting drama, expectation, compromise, performance. What remains feels spare but solid, solid enough to build on, solid enough to last. The final accounting will not be written for decades. Historians will look back and debate whether the withdrawal represented collapse or adaptation, tragedy or liberation. They will cite fertility charts, marriage rates, happiness surveys, economic productivity metrics. They will argue over causes, feminism, no fault divorce, dating apps, wage stagnation, social media amplification, porn ubiquity, legal incentives, cultural narratives. They will reach no consensus because no single cause explains the whole. What they will see clearly is the outcome: a society reorganized around smaller units, older averages, higher individual sovereignty, lower collective reproduction. They will see men who walked away, not out of hatred, but out of logic. They will see women who reached for connection, not out of weakness, but out of wiring. They will see both groups doing what rational actors do when incentives pull in opposite directions, following the pull until something stronger pulls back. Nothing stronger has pulled back yet. The momentum continues. The paths diverge. The story keeps unfolding. One sunrise at a time, one quiet decision at a time, one life lived on self chosen terms at a time. And just remember, if you want tomorrow's video today, hit the join button to get early access to all of my latest uploads. Shout out to the 2 Hour Gang who made it all the way to the end of this deep dive. You stuck around for the full picture. No skimming, no shortcuts, respect. If you're enjoying these angry guy breakdowns, show some support by buying me a Red Bull. Links in the description. Helps keep the engine running. Drop a comment below. What did you think about everything laid out here? Do you agree with the direction things are heading? Disagree? See something I missed? Share your thoughts. I read everyone. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.